Imagine this. The sky turns black as a brutal ice age storm sweeps across the tundra. Freezing winds cut through animal furs like knives, snow piles against the cave entrance, and predators stalk in the shadows. In this deadly cold, survival isn't guaranteed. Yet cave women and their tribes endured these winters. How did they escape nature's most unforgiving storms and live to see another sunrise? Picture this. The sky darkens without warning. Heavy clouds roll across the horizon, swallowing the fading sun. The winds rise into a deafening howl, whipping snow and ice through the air like shards of broken glass. This isn't just weather, it's a death sentence for anyone unprepared. These were Ice Age storms, and they were among the fiercest forces nature ever unleashed on humankind. For cave women and their families, such storms could last for days, even weeks. Temperatures plummeted so low that exposed skin could freeze within minutes. The air itself seemed to bite, numbing fingers, stiffening muscles, and draining strength. Imagine trying to keep a fire alive when every gust of wind threatened to snuff it out, leaving only the endless cold. But the danger wasn't just the freezing air. Visibility vanished in the blizzard's whiteout, making hunting impossible and travel suicidal. A tribe caught outside risked getting separated and lost in the storm, never to return. And if the snow piled too high against a cave entrance, people could be trapped inside, slowly starving if food hadn't been stored beforehand. Welcome to Before Flame. If you enjoyed traveling back in time with me, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next journey into our ancient past. Now I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? It'll make me so happy to see our community connecting from all around the world. And most importantly, if this video make you just imagine the Stone Age, or actually feel what it was like to live as a caveman or cavewoman, share your thoughts below and I'm excited to read them all. Predators added yet another layer of terror. Saber-toothed cats, wolves and cave lions prowled the edges of storms, stalking the weak and vulnerable. The moment the winds quieted, the hunt began. To step outside was to gamble with death. This was the world cave women lived in, an unforgiving reality where one mistake could cost not just their lives, but the survival of their children and tribe. Yet, against all odds, they found ways to endure. When we think of the Ice Age, it's easy to picture hulking hunters battling mammoths or saber-toothed predators. But survival wasn't only about brute strength. It was about endurance, adaptability, and above all, preparation. Cave women in particular carried an enormous share of this survival burden, often in ways history overlooks. During a winter storm, every task became harder. Fetching water wasn't as simple as walking to a stream. Rivers froze solid, forcing women to chip through layers of ice just to fill a vessel. Gathering firewood meant braving the cold, scouring the frozen ground for twigs and branches, then carrying heavy loads back against howling winds. Even inside the cave, smoke from damp logs could choke the air, yet the fire had to be kept alive because without it, death crept in swiftly. Food, too, was a daily battle. Hunting often ground to a halt during storms, leaving women responsible for rationing dried meat, berries and roots stored away in precious hides. Cooking wasn't about luxury. It was about stretching every scrap, making sure children and elders ate first, and keeping strength in the hunters for when the skies finally cleared. Then there were the most fragile lives, the babies. A crying infant in sub-zero temperatures could mean disaster. Women wrapped them in layers of animal fur, holding them close to their own bodies to share warmth, even as their own skin froze. Nursing mothers faced the impossible, staying nourished enough themselves to keep producing milk when food was scarce. In those brutal days, survival wasn't won by spears alone. It was held together by small, tireless acts of endurance. Cave women's hands, cracked and frozen, were often the ones that kept the fire, the food, and the family alive. The howling wind outside a cave wasn't just a physical threat, it was a constant reminder of how fragile life truly was. For cave women, the battle didn't stop at keeping fires alive or children fed. There was also the storm inside the mind, fear, exhaustion, and the crushing weight of responsibility. Imagine nights when the cave shook with the roar of the blizzard. The fire burned low, food supplies dwindled, and children whimpered in their sleep. Men might have been away on a desperate hunting trip, leaving women as the guardians of the tribe's survival. The fear of predators creeping closer in the storm, or the possibility of a roof of ice collapsing, gnawed at their thoughts. Every crack in the cave walls, every flicker of the fire, carried a whisper of danger. But fear had to be masked. If children saw panic in their mother's eyes, despair would spread like frost. Cave women learned to wear calm expressions, to soothe with gentle songs or rhythmic movements, even as their own hearts pounded with anxiety. Survival meant not only protecting bodies, but also keeping spirits from shattering. Resilience wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. They leaned on rituals passed down through generations, stories of ancestors who had braved storms before, chants to ward off evil, or small symbolic acts like scattering herbs into the fire. These weren't superstitions in the modern sense. They were survival tools for the spirit, keeping hope alive when everything else seemed to be slipping away. By enduring the storms of the mind as fiercely as the storms outside, cave women carried not just themselves but entire tribes through the longest and coldest nights of the Ice Age. When deadly winter storms tore across the Ice Age world, survival wasn't only about strength, it was about strategy. And cave women often held the knowledge that kept entire tribes alive. One of their most underestimated skills was mastery over shelter. Caves weren't just places to sleep, they were survival laboratories. Women learned to study the land carefully, choosing caves with narrow entrances to block icy winds or high ledges that predators couldn't easily climb. They understood where water dripped too heavily, where fire smoke could escape without suffocating the family, and which corners stayed warmest even in the coldest nights. Inside, they transformed bare stone into livable spaces. Animal skins were hung as primitive insulation, cracks stuffed with moss and mud to block drafts. Fires were strategically placed, not just for warmth but for smoke to repel predators. Some women even arranged living spaces to keep the youngest and weakest at the warm center, while stronger adults slept near the edges. These small adjustments often meant the difference between life and death, but shelter wasn't only about the cave itself. Cave women built makeshift windbreaks from branches and animal hides, or dug shallow pits lined with furs to trap body heat. They understood microclimates, those hidden spots where warmth lingered longer. Modern archaeologists have found traces of these adjustments, evidence that women's knowledge shaped survival far more than brute strength. What's remarkable is how instinct and observation merged into a kind of prehistoric science. Each choice, where to place a fire, how to layer skins, when to shift camp, was a lesson passed down through generations. These weren't random acts of desperation. They were calculated moves, showing that cave women were not passive survivors, but active architects of resilience. While men often roamed far in pursuit of mammoths or bison, cave women developed survival strategies much closer to home. When storms made hunting impossible, their knowledge of foraging became the backbone of survival. Every patch of frozen land held secrets, seeds buried under snow, hardy roots waiting just below the surface, berries preserved by frost. Cave women knew how to dig beneath ice-crusted soil to pull out edible plants, or strip bark from trees rich in nutrients. They remembered the exact spots where herbs grew in warmer seasons, storing that knowledge for when food was scarce. They were also masters of preservation. Leftover meat was dried and stored in cold caves like natural refrigerators. Animal fat was kept not only for cooking, but for burning in lamps or waterproofing hides. Even bones had value, ground into powder for soup or carved into tools. Nothing went to waste. In fact, cave women often turned scraps into survival lifelines. Firewood and tinder were another hidden treasure. While storms raged, women gathered twigs, moss, and dried dung from animals, all tucked carefully away to keep flames alive when it mattered most. Without that fire, the tribe would face not only cold, but also predators drawn to their weakness. And then there were medicinal plants. From calming teas to poultices that eased frostbite, women carried generations of healing knowledge. They weren't just feeding the tribe, they were protecting it. In a world where one failed hunt could mean starvation, this skill was survival itself. Foraging wasn't secondary to hunting. It was the steady heartbeat of life in the Ice Age. Cave women weren't simply waiting for food to return. They were outsmarting the storms, transforming hidden resources into resilience. When winter storms closed in, food was only part of the battle. The true enemy was cold, merciless, bone-cracking, life-stealing cold. And here the cave woman's role became nothing short of sacred. She was the keeper of the fire. Fire was more than warmth. It was light in endless nights, protection against wolves and cave lions, and the invisible shield that kept disease at bay. A single spark meant the difference between survival and extinction. Women understood this intimately. They guarded embers as though they were children, cradling glowing coals in bark, or carrying them in stone bowls when the group moved. Even in blizzards, the fire had to live. It wasn't only about maintaining flames, it was about mastering the art of fuel. Cave women gathered and sorted wood, separating dry twigs for kindling, thick logs for slow burns, and mosses or dung for quick ignition. They knew how to angle stones to block the wind, how to breathe life into fading sparks without smothering them, and how to make a fire last through the longest, darkest nights. Around the fire, life unfolded. Children huddled close, elders told stories, and hunters thawed their frozen bodies. The fire wasn't just heat, it was community, identity, and hope. Hand at its heart stood the women who made sure it never died. So when we imagine Ice Age survival, we shouldn't just see spears flashing in the hunt. We should also picture a woman's steady hands protecting glowing embers, her eyes sharp with focus, her knowledge passed down from generations before her. Because in the deadliest winter storms, survival often depended not on the hunter's kill, but on the cave woman's fire. The Ice Age wasn't just about hunger and cold, it was also about fear. Predators lurked everywhere, and winter storms made them bolder. Wolves prowled the edges of camps, their yellow eyes glowing in the dark. Cave lions and hyenas tested the boundaries of human firelight, waiting for weakness. For a cave woman, danger was constant. But survival wasn't always about fighting back. It was about outsmarting the silent watchers of the night. Cave women knew the rhythm of predators. They studied tracks in the snow, noted which trails were fresh, and learned to read the forest's silences. When birds stopped calling or the wind shifted, they knew danger was near. This deep awareness gave them an edge. They also mastered the art of illusion. Fires were built in specific ways, sometimes smaller to avoid attracting attention, sometimes larger to send a message of strength. Bones and scraps of meat were thrown far from camp to lure scavengers away. Even sleeping arrangements were tactical. Children and the vulnerable slept at the center, while women and men formed the outer rings, backs to the cold stone, eyes scanning the shadows. Weapons weren't just spears. Cave women carried stone tools tucked into belts of hide, sharp flakes of flint that could slice fur, flesh, or rope if needed. And they were resourceful. A flaming branch wasn't only for warmth, it was a weapon, a torch to push back a wolf or blind a predator lunging in the dark. Predators tested them every night. But survival wasn't just raw strength, it was strategy, patience, and vigilance. And here women were not passive figures hiding behind hunters. They were protectors, defenders, and guardians of the Night Watch. Predators thrived in the Ice Age, but so did the storms. And sometimes, those same brutal storms that threatened human survival became unlikely allies. Cave women learned to read weather the way others read tracks. The sudden hush before snowfall, the shift of the wind, the way clouds swallowed the moon, all were signs that nature itself was about to change the rules of the hunt. When wolves grew too bold, storms could be used as camouflage. A sudden blizzard made scents vanish and muffled sound, confusing even the sharpest hunters of the wild. Cave women timed their movements to these moments, slipping away from danger under the cover of swirling snow. They would wrap furs tightly, huddle together, and let the storm erase their trail, leaving predators wandering aimlessly in the whiteout. But it wasn't just escape, it was offense. Women understood that predators feared fire and wind as much as humans did. In howling gales, flames bent low, sparks flying wildly, and this chaos became a shield. Torches held high, flaring in the storm, made a band of cave women look larger, more threatening. Wolves that once pressed close would retreat into the dark, unwilling to gamble against fire and fury combined. Sometimes, the storms even worked as barriers. Heavy snow created natural walls, trapping predators or blocking cave entrances. Cave women took advantage of this, sealing off the tribe's shelter, knowing that while they shivered inside, the storm punished their enemies outside. To most, a storm was merciless, but to the cave woman it was a tool, an unpredictable, dangerous ally that could turn the balance of power in her favor. In the dance between prey and predator, she learned to let nature fight alongside her. As the night deepened and winds screamed through the valleys, predators grew bolder. The fire was more than warmth. It was life, the fragile barrier between humans and the icy jaws of the wild. And guarding it often fell to the women. Long after hunters collapsed into exhausted sleep, cave women kept the flames alive. They fed it with scraps of wood, dried grasses, even bones when fuel was scarce. Each flicker pushed back the shadows, where the glowing eyes of wolves lingered, watching, waiting. The women knew if the fire died, the tribe's defenses would crumble instantly, so they became the guardians of the firelight. Their vigilance the line between survival and slaughter. Children often slept curled close to their mothers, breathing softly as the flames danced above. Women whispered stories to keep one another awake, their voices rising and falling with the crackle of burning wood. These stories weren't just for passing time, they carried warnings, lessons, and courage. In those tales, fire was sacred, a gift from the spirits, a weapon no predator could conquer. The predators knew it too. Bears sniffed at the cave mouth but rarely stepped inside. Packs of wolves circled, but each time the flames roared higher, they backed into the night. The women's steady hands tossing wood into the blaze meant the difference between fear and safety. And so in the frozen dark, the cave woman stood as a shield, not with spears or brute force, but with patience, watchfulness, and fire. She was the protector of children, the keeper of warmth, and the silent warrior who ensured the dawn would come. Her strength was quiet, but it burned as fiercely as the flames she guarded. Through storms, hunger, and the prowling dangers of the night, cave women were more than survivors. They were the heartbeat of their tribes. They carried fire in their hands, children on their backs, and courage in their veins. Their resilience was not measured by brute strength alone, but by patience, vigilance, and a will to protect life at any cost. The story of how they endured deadly winters is a reminder that survival in the prehistoric world was not just about spears and hunts. It was about community, care, and the quiet endurance of those who kept watch while others slept. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, cave women stood unyielding, ensuring humanity's flame never went out.